Hi, I'm Lauren from Anecdo Speakers Bank, and I use she, her pronouns. Before we get started, I would first like to begin our session today by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Sovereignty has never been ceded, it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So, today we're here with Suzette, a Hobsons Bay local. Suzette, do you mind sharing a bit about yourself and what interested you about being on a podcast today?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so my name's Suzette. I live in Altona North in Hobsons Bay. Actually, before I start, I too want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I live on, which is the Yalukit Willem of the Bunurong people. And, I really do owe those peoples a debt of gratitude because I'm an ecologist and a local conservation ranger. And my passion has always been the Australian bush, the animals and plants. And, I actually grew up in Sydney, so I lived on different country up there. But here, the Yalukit Willem of the Bunurong, people of the Bunurong Nation, looked after these lands for millennia, and I get to now enjoy the incredible wildlife that we have here, thanks to them. I moved to Melbourne about 10 years ago for love, and currently I work at Hobsons Bay City Council as a conservation ranger because I've always, ever since I studied ecology at UNSW and I did my honours there as well, I've always loved, as I said, native plants and animals. So I've always wanted to work in that field, and it's great. I get to, as a conservation ranger, I get to educate people about our incredible open spaces here in Hobsons Bay, and I also get to meet people as well. So it's a perfect sort of mix of environment and mixing with people. And then what I'm also doing when I'm not at work at the moment, I'm the Greens candidate for the federal electorate of Gellibrand. So I'm standing for the upcoming federal election. Particularly, we might get to this later, but particularly during when COVID hit, I saw there was a real need for people to be kind to each other and to really get that. I know our politicians keep saying we're all in this together, but a lot of people haven't had that experience. So I'm really out to foster that experience.
Yeah, especially like if from a politician's standpoint, in my opinion, that, they haven't really suffered the impact of their employment, taking a hit during COVID, whereas hospitality and
arts.
Yeah, definitely having to suffer for it. And
and even the people who were say lucky enough to remain employed, like our frontline workers, they're just exhausted, and most of their experience is that they're exhausted and they've just been working, and then in my opinion, I don't think they're paid appropriately for what they do.
Yeah. Definitely.
At least it's not. At least the resource the sector isn't resourced appropriately. So there's not enough of those essential workers out there, and that includes, as we found out during COVID, that even includes cleaners and people who we may never have considered essential workers. Those people are really make the backbone of our society go round. So and local coffee shop owners and all that who've really, local businesses have really suffered during COVID.
Everyone who plays a part in the community. Yeah. Oh man. Do you mind telling me a bit about your experience during COVID? You were, I think, in the email you've sent, you started a lot of community events in your neighbourhood.
Yeah. I before COVID, I think in 2018 or 19, I can't remember, I read this incredible book by Hugh Mackay, a famous Australian sociologist, called Australia Reimagined. And it was really fortuitous that I'd read his book before COVID because it was really, it was an inspiring book in and of itself. But he talked about a few things that human beings need for their mental well-being, as opposed to our physical well-being, like we need food and shelter and water and warmth and that kind of thing. But for our mental well-being, we need various things such as exposure to nature, which, of course, when lockdown happened, our local parks were being hammered because everyone realised how important it was to get out and have a walk around and be exposed to nature. He also mentions some sort of artistic expression, some sort of belief or commitment to something bigger than yourself, whether that be God or whether that be spirituality or whether that be a commitment to a cause that's beyond your sort of own needs. And one of the things that really hit me is that he said that people need community. And he sort of, in his book, he sort of studied that from the point of view of the importance of neighbours and creating a neighbourhood feel around you wherever you are. So I lived in South Kingsville at the time, which is also in Hobson's Bay, but just sort of near where I live now, near Altona North. And when we first started going into lockdown in 2020 or into things closing down anyway, it maybe wasn't called lockdown then. I remember the day that that I read in all the newspapers that toilet paper was disappearing off the shelves everywhere. And I remember saying to my partner, Julie, that the panic may well be worse than the virus, which luckily didn't turn out to be the case. But that impacted me so greatly that I just sort of thought the only reason toilet paper is disappearing off the shelves is because people are scared. People were concerned about, we had no idea what was coming. We knew it was going to be bad, but we didn't quite know what it meant. And so people were panic buying is the common expression. And I was like, and I knew it didn't have to go that way. And I know that people in Australia, like pretty much everyone, almost every Australian I've met is at heart just wants to, do good, be good to other people. Maybe that's a simplistic way to look at the world, but that's my impression, that at heart, most people, probably at least 80 to 90% of people are actually good people, and they want to do well by other people. But of course, when someone gets scared, all you think about are you and yours. You only think about, oh, gee, I've got to say, I've got to protect my family. I've got to protect me. I've got to protect my children. I've got to protect my husband, whatever it might be. Yeah. So I thought, well, I could, at least in my community, I could foster a sense of neighbourliness. So first of all, I printed out about 100 sort of just little slips of paper with my name and my phone number on it. I think a community over in WA invented this piece of paper actually, because I found it on the internet somewhere. And it just had a little tick box system saying, do you need, and you could tick, are you isolating? Do you need assistance getting the shopping? Do you need, post delivered? There were all sorts of things. Or do you just need a chat? So, I dropped those in about 100 people's letterboxes. And I remember Julie, my partner at the time, went, do you really want to give your phone number out to all these strangers in our neighbourhood? And I was like, hadn't really thought about that, but I don't think anything bad's going to happen from it. And sure enough, nothing bad happened. I didn't have anyone requesting my services, but I did have, 3 or 4 texts come back saying, oh, thank you so much. I'm not isolating. I don't need anything, but really, really happy to know that, we live in a neighbourhood that cares. So then out of that positive response, I thought, well, what else could we do? So then by that time, Julie was on board as well. So we printed out about 300 slips of paper inviting everyone to a masks and flasks party in our local park. So this was before lockdown, before we weren't allowed to, socialise with each other. There were some rules. You had to wear a mask outdoors, but we were still allowed to meet each other. So the idea was that you could bring your favourite beverage in a flask, and just basically come and meet your neighbours. And I think I wrote on the slip something like, I know our neighbourhood cares about each other, and this is just a way for us to get to know our neighbours in these troubling times, or something like that. So we had I put a 3-hour time slot or something, and Julie and I just hung out there the whole time, and we had people come and go, which was probably appropriate for where we were at in COVID, rather than a whole big group. Yeah. I did have to think about it, like, oh, should I be encouraging a gathering when we've been told, that this virus can spread and, all this stuff. But people came and went, and we probably met about 20 different sort of households. And we just asked them, what do you think we need? And sort of everyone came to the conclusion that we just want to create a WhatsApp group for our neighbourhood. So, Julie and I took everyone's numbers and we created this WhatsApp group, and it was specifically for the purpose of asking for help or offering help during COVID particularly. And that could be voluntary help or paid help, because we also knew that people were going to start to lose their jobs and things like that. So that was really nice. It created there's an app called Nextdoor, which I'm on now, which is kind of similar, but I didn't know about Nextdoor then. But it was obviously this WhatsApp group was a lot smaller because it was literally just, you know, a few streets around our neighbourhood. But over time it did grow, and I think at the peak of it, it's still going now, but at the peak of it we had maybe 45 or 50 households on. Wow. So and people have just been, you know, the resources that you have in your own neighbourhood are fantastic. We had an industrial chemist who lived up the street from us, and he was making his own hand sanitizer from the United Nations approved recipe for hand sanitizer, which was awesome because at the time, I don't know if you remember, but in 2020 hand sanitizer started to disappear, because definitely. People were buying it, of course, but we also didn't have the supply because it wasn't expected that we, you know, it was this sudden thing, suddenly we need hand sanitizer everywhere. So I remember one day I had to, you know, I got contacted by someone on the neighbourhood group who said, does anyone have hand sanitizer for the local childcare centre, because they've run out. And I think at that point we had a rule like, you know, you're not allowed to come into the childcare centre unless you've sanitised your hands, and you know, so the staff were like, how are the parents going to pick up their kids, and you know, all this stuff. So I grabbed the hand sanitizer off this chemist who was at work that day, and brought it down to the childcare centre, and so that was one of the probably the most fun sort of stories. But it's just, you know, all the time people are. I guess it's created this sharing economy. You know, people are sharing their backyard fruit and veg, and later in the pandemic, in 2021, Julie and I had to be isolated because we're at a tier 1 exposure site. And so then, you know, the love came back to us because we're like, we're stuck at home. And by that time we'd moved house, we're in a rental property. And I was like, can someone bring around some, you know, pots so we can start a vegetable garden since we won't be leaving the house for, you know, 2 weeks. So, neighbours brought around, you know, a shovel and some pots and some seedlings and, you know, all sorts of things. So, it's really awesome.
How's the garden going, by the way?
Yeah, good. Our basil is doing really well, finally, because we got some tomatoes in there as well. Unfortunately, we went away for a few days, you know, more recently when we could. Unfortunately, we stupidly didn't get anyone to look after our pizza thyme and oregano, so we died because it was really hot then. But we'll start again. We'll get some cuttings and start again.
It's okay. They're very resilient plants anyways.
Yeah.
That sounds really great. I always like hearing a bit about, so I guess part of the pleasure of doing interviews as well is although hearing you get to hear people's, I guess, lows in COVID, that you also get to hear some of the long-lasting positive impacts. So getting to hear how you were able to foster the community around you and, you know, have it ongoing as well, outside of with restrictions easing. That's really wonderful to hear.
Yeah. Look, I have been one of the lucky ones. I know, you know, I'm pretty privileged, you know, in Australia. Well, apart from being a gay woman, I guess that's where I'm not privileged, but I'm also white, which is privilege in Australia. And I also have a good income, and I came from a really good family. I have a stable family base, and and therefore I had a fairly positive COVID experience overall, because I did have a job the whole time, you know, whereas my partner, Julie, who you've spoken to, her father died from COVID, so she had an awful COVID experience because it's pretty obvious he wouldn't have died at that point. I don't know how long he would have lived for it, but he certainly wouldn't have died at that point if COVID hadn't come through. It did hit us personally in that way. But yeah, I think I also know I'm privileged because I do live in Hobsons Bay, and Hobsons Bay has the I think we're the council area with the highest proportion of open space per head of population for a metro council, that is. But that's also not across the board in Hobsons Bay. Like people who live in Hobsons Bay in Altona North and Brooklyn don't have that same proportion of open space as the people who live in Williamstown and Altona, kind of thing. So so don't know where I was going with that, but yeah, I guess overall my experience was pretty positive, but I was conscious of, you know, all the people whose experiences are not positive, even at the best of times, let alone when we're facing a international pandemic.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is important to, although appreciate your own experience in I guess like pandemic settings, but also to acknowledge that there are also people doing it a lot tougher and who also experience more barriers than you to accessing services or resources to meet their basic needs.
Yep.
Definitely.
Yeah, and you and I are doing this interview on International Women's Day, so you know, again, I sent a post out this morning just to acknowledge that all my sisters who are women of colour or you know, trans women or disabled women or what have you, you know, I have a whole lot more privilege than them, and you know, we know inequality is so big in Australian society now. It's and this is not just my opinion. This is actually a fact. You can find studies that show back in 1975 there was virtually no inequality in Australia, and that was largely due to a series of governments, which were both Liberal and Labor, introducing policies that ensured employment. At least in those days, it was for men, but we had essentially 100% employment back in 1975 for anyone who wanted it, or we might say for anyone who felt like they needed it. Like a lot of women probably would have been expected to stay at home, but anyway, for anyone who was looking for work, they had 100% employment. And then ever since 1975, the gap has been growing, again because of a series of policies that successive Liberal and Labor governments have brought in. And now the level of inequality in Australia is equal to what it was back in the 1930s, which was Depression era. You know, it was after the war where lots of people were unemployed and, you know, people were poor and scraping around for food. And now we're back at that level, which is really sad because especially when I know it doesn't have to be like that. You know, it really is a political choice. It might not seem like that for people, but where we are in Australia right now has been a series of political choices. It doesn't have to be that way in Australia. And we know that because you can look at countries like, you know, Sweden and Finland and Norway and, you know, all those Nordic and what's the other term for those countries? I've forgotten. Anyway, the Scandinavian and Nordic countries, which have different policies to Australia. Now, I know they have different populations as well. They have different numbers of people. They're a different size country. But that's not the secret. The secret is they choose to invest their money in education and health and, you know, services that actually support people. And therefore, they have very low levels of inequality, very low levels of homelessness, very low levels of, you know, poverty. And Australia could be like that as well. We've just chosen to go down the sort of neoliberal capitalist pathway, unfortunately.
Well, thank you so much.
This has been really fun. Thanks. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. And yeah, thank you to Anecto and all the incredible work that you guys do, because I'm sure a lot of your staff were, you know, out there on the front line as well during COVID, looking after some of our vulnerable communities. So important.
Well, thank you so much for your time. And it was a pleasure interviewing you and your partner, Julie. So anyone who is watching or listening today, if anyone would like to get in touch with us or learn more about Nectar Speakers Bank, you can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter, or you can email us at speakersbank@nectar.org.au or give us a call. Bye for now and see you next time. Bye.